we shouldn't be surprised with all that's coming out and all the worries about tariffs. It's not just that, it's the complexity of everything else as well. The changes within the federal government, the worries about job losses, the worries about a slowing economy, higher inflation, and eventually you get these...
Attention, we have sensational news that could change the course of the global economy. A trade war is unfolding before the eyes of the entire world, reaching a whole new level. China has just made a decision that will threaten not only American aviation, but the global economy as a whole. How did this happen?
In other words, pre-substitution, if we just continue as we are now. But of course, people will start to substitute. They will find other goods. And as the Christmas Tree Association said a moment or two ago, it's going to be very difficult to find substitution of many things that we currently get from China.
On May 3, 2025, several billion-dollar Boeing 737 MAX aircraft were on the runway, ready for takeoff. They were all fully prepared, brand new and custom-made for major Chinese airlines. These planes were waiting for one thing: to take to the skies and continue their work at the intersection of the world's two largest economies. But instead, without any explanation or official statement, the Chinese authorities said no. These planes did not take off, and they returned to Boeing's factories in Seattle. Why? What is behind this decision?
Surveys like the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment, and it's a really worrying number because at some point these sentiment surveys feed into hard data of real consumer spending. And we know this from history and precedent, that's what happens. So when we see a number as bad as this one, it is only a matter of time, unless anything else changes that would suddenly make people more cheerful. Look at that chart. I mean, just look at it. Unless people suddenly become more cheerful, why would this not translate into spending? You see, that consumer lab, the lab from Yale, that number of 4,700, that is providing you don't start substituting goods.
This is not just a rejection of the planes, it is a blow to one of the most powerful American corporations, Boeing, a symbol of American industry, which until now has been not only a leader in the global aviation market, but also a crucial part of US geopolitical strategy. But now everything has changed. China, as the largest buyer of Boeing products, has suddenly become the first to reject these planes, and this is no accident.
Yeah, you'll be surprised just how much we get exclusively from China. And Jim, I'm really curious to get your perspective on the White House's handling of this situation. Not so much the tariffs that have been announced, but this reporting that the White House, that officials have made clear to Beijing that they want Xi to ask for a call with Trump.
This whole situation is unfolding against the backdrop of an escalating trade war between the US and China. The US has just imposed new tariffs on Chinese goods, including aviation products, and now China's response is not just economic, but strategic. China is not just trying to hurt an American company, it is questioning the very foundation of US economic power, breaking long-standing economic ties and building new relationships with competitors, primarily with European giant Airbus. And this is just the beginning. What does this mean for American manufacturing? What global consequences will this move have for the entire world? How long can Boeing remain the leader if China, its second largest market, is no longer willing to work with it? And most importantly, what will happen to thousands of American jobs if this conflict continues?
Right now, 145 going up against 125. These are the tariffs between the world's two biggest economies.
And here's another number, 4,700, or about $400 per month. That is how much more money Yale's now estimating, the Yale Budget Lab, that President Trump's tariffs are going to cost average households each year. And with just hours left in trading, the Dow right now...
This is more than just a rejection of aircraft. It is the beginning of a new era in global trade and politics. In the next few minutes, we will analyze what is behind China's decision and how it could change the future, not only for aviation, but for the entire global economy. Stay with us, because what we are about to tell you will make you rethink your view of the future of global trade.
Up. You're seeing that swing here going into the afternoon, up almost 650 points. But it was up and down there throughout earlier in the day. With us now, we have CNN business editor at large, Richard Quest. We have CNN chief national security analyst, Jim Sciutto, as well. Richard, a key economic gauge, the consumer sentiment now at its second lowest level on record, going back to 1952. Why?
At a time when the world has not yet realized the full depth of the changes that have taken place in recent weeks, China has made a decision that has become a turning point in world trade and affected one of the most significant American corporations, Boeing. The decision, which was made on a quiet Saturday, May the 3rd, 2025, shocked the entire aviation and manufacturing world. This was not just a refusal to accept another batch of aircraft. China made a fateful decision not only for itself, but for the global economy as a whole. They said no to the Boeing 737 MAX, the latest model that was supposed to join the fleets of China's largest airlines. These aircraft, worth billions of dollars, were completely ready for delivery and were considered the pinnacle of the latest aviation technology. But suddenly, without any prior announcement or explanation, China simply turned its back.
Well, if they did fall on deaf ears, but it's just the latest example in the really day by day, the deepening trade war that is underway between the United States and China. Yes, we are learning that U.S. officials privately behind the scenes urged China to not retaliate. In fact, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that publicly all along, warning countries to not retaliate. Well, those warnings have fallen on deaf ears, particularly with China, as they raised their tariffs to 125%. The question now is which side is going to blink?
This move was a huge political and economic statement by China. Despite decades of mutually beneficial trade relations, and despite the billions of dollars that China had invested in purchasing and modernizing its aviation industry with the help of Boeing, relations between the two countries are now on the brink of collapse. This was no accident. It was part of a much larger strategy, where every element was calculated down to the smallest detail. China not only cancelled orders for aircraft, but also called into question all economic ties with America in the high-tech sector. On that day, China did not simply reject deliveries. It sent a powerful signal to the whole world that its strategy was changing, and that it was now ready not only to compete, but to overturn a market that seemed to be firmly in the hands of the US. What is behind this decision? First of all, it is important to understand that Boeing was more than just a supplier to China. For more than 30 years, starting in the 1980s, when China began to rapidly develop its aviation industry, Boeing was a key partner. Chinese aviation was modernized thanks to American aircraft. They used Boeing not only as a supplier, but also as a strategic partner on which the country's air infrastructure was built. In addition, Boeing gave China access to advanced technologies and knowledge that were extremely important to China against the backdrop of its ambitious growth. Boeing in turn saw China not just as a market, but as a strategically important partner. China was its second largest market, accounting for more than a quarter of all commercial deliveries. Boeing not only supplied China with commercial aircraft, but also provided important economic contracts for the country, influencing the development of Chinese aviation and allowing it to avoid competition from European Airbus. Now that this link has been severed, Boeing finds itself in a position where not only its future in the Chinese market, but also the future of its entire international strategy is at risk.
Lived in China. You've covered China for some time now. As we're looking at this question of who's going to blink first, with two very different political systems, what is your gauge on this?
Well, different systems, listen, one's a democracy, one is not. One's a single-party state, very much not a democracy. But China does have politics, and Chinese leaders do not want to be seen, we were talking about this yesterday, I believe, do not want to be seen as capitulating to America. That is not good politics for a Chinese leader.
China's decision to suspend Boeing deliveries was, of course, a result of the economic sanctions imposed by the United States on Chinese goods. After introducing new tariffs of 10% on all Chinese imports and up to 145% on certain goods, China decided not only to respond with economic measures, but also to strike at the heart of American industry. The timing of this blow was perfect. Boeing had just completed construction of its new production facility in China, and deliveries of the latest 737 MAX aircraft were supposed to be the culmination of a long-standing partnership. But now, all this is under threat. As a result, China has sent a clear signal. If the US continues to impose such measures, China is prepared not only to sever relations with one of the largest American manufacturers, but also to begin reducing its participation in the American economy, replacing American goods with European or Chinese equivalents.
Including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, of course, I'm going to respond. And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs. ABC's chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce leading us off.
Today, President Trump side by side in the Oval Office with the head of the Irish government.
These sanctions and China's response in the form of refusing to deliver aircraft have become not just another moment in the trade war, but a signal to the entire global economy. A country capable of threatening the world's largest exporter of aircraft is ready to take tougher measures. In this way, China is calling into question not only the future of American companies, but also the stability of the global economic system as a whole. When Boeing, in desperation, began moving the rejected aircraft to Seattle, it was not just a problem for the company, it was the first warning sign for the entire industry. It is a signal that strategic alliances that have been sacrosanct for decades are now under threat. This is an undermining of the global economy, where reliability and stability have been fundamental principles for all players. China, having gained access to new technologies and powerful manufacturing capabilities, has decided to abandon its commitments to the US, paving the way to take the lead in the aircraft manufacturing market in the future. Thus begins a new era in which, instead of maintaining stability in global markets, China is severing old ties, threatening major US corporations, and redistributing economic power in its favor. This move is part of a larger strategy aimed at seizing leadership in areas such as aviation and high technology. And while economists and analysts may try to predict the consequences of such a decision, one thing remains clear. This moment could be a turning point in global trade and in relations between the world's two largest economies.
But it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
All of this suggests that China's next move may not be merely economic, but geopolitical. China is already in talks with Airbus about possible large deliveries that could completely destroy Boeing's monopoly on the Chinese market. This only underscores how serious this move is and how it could change the future of global aviation and the American manufacturing sector. After China decided to reject Boeing deliveries, the situation began to develop rapidly. One of the first steps was that Boeing's 737 MAX aircraft that had previously been sent to China began returning to American factories, standing in empty hangars in Seattle and Hua, like silent witnesses to a sudden and unexpected crisis. This refusal to deliver signaled that Boeing could no longer count on stability and long-term contracts with Chinese airlines. Deliveries of aircraft that were supposed to replenish the fleets of China's largest carriers were cancelled without explanation. Chinese airlines, previously the main buyers of American aircraft, no longer accepted these machines. The return of aircraft from Chinese factories was not just an economic setback for Boeing, it was a moment when the entire global aircraft supply system was on the verge of collapse.
To allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. it's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day, because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, etc. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145% U.S., China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is.
The loss of the Chinese market was not just the loss of a single customer. It was the destruction of the strategic importance of Boeing's entire international operations in China. The confirmation that China was rejecting Boeing deliveries not only affected the company's financial position, but also showed how fragile dependence on a single foreign market can be. China, with its huge aircraft fleet and steady growth, has been one of the largest customers for American manufacturers for decades, and now all of that is under threat. However, this situation was not accidental. It all happened against the backdrop of escalating trade tensions and the introduction of new tariffs. The Chinese authorities, demonstrating toughness in their decision, made it clear that they were not prepared to put up with external pressure and economic sanctions, continuing to ramp up their efforts in the domestic market and seeking to replace Western technology with their own.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into
the higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to pay in shops.
These steps by China have also given a powerful boost to the recovery and strengthening of the domestic Chinese aviation industry. In recent years, the country has been actively investing in the development of its own technologies and aircraft. Although the C999 model has not yet been mass-construed, the decisions taken in recent weeks could accelerate this process. Soon, Comalec may be able to offer Chinese airlines domestic equivalents of Western aircraft, which will pose another threat to Boeing. This process can be seen as part of China's broader strategy of independent development and expansion of its influence in high technology. Without relying on Western partners, the Chinese can significantly accelerate the development and introduction of new aircraft, while significantly reducing their dependence on external supplies.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
For Boeing, the consequences of refusing Chinese deliveries became clear even before the company managed to find a replacement for these contracts. The issue of adapting the manufactured aircraft became equally important. Every aircraft that Boeing built for Chinese airlines was fully customized to their requirements, from seating to electronics and cockpit components. Retrofitting these aircraft to meet the requirements of other buyers is a costly and time-consuming process, not to mention the fact that these aircraft cannot simply be sold without significant losses, as they have already been specified to meet Chinese standards. Remarketing these aircraft is a difficult and very costly process that will require enormous effort and financial investment. But even if Boeing manages to find buyers for these aircraft, it will only be a temporary solution that will not be able to return the company to its usual level.
Well, when you look at the kind of input Musk has been having into politics, there has been some polling done which suggests there is a strong dissatisfaction with.
This situation has become not only an economic disaster for the US, but also a political one. The loss of the Chinese market, which was caused by the Chinese government's decision, threatens the entire US aviation industry. Representatives of the Aviation Union, which represents the interests of workers at Boeing factories, have already begun to express concerns about the future of their jobs. Thousands of workers employed in aircraft assembly could lose their jobs, and an industry that is already struggling could find itself in an even more difficult situation. If this crisis continues, it could spell disaster for an entire industry that has long been considered an integral part of American economic power.
The Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels.
American economists and political scientists warn that we are on the verge of a new era in international trade, where not only the US but also Europe will be forced to take China's ambitions into account. This is no longer just a response to US tariffs, it is a strategic step towards creating a new global economic structure, where old centers of power are losing their positions and China is gradually taking the lead. This transition from the world's factory to a technological and economic giant is already fully visible. China is aware of its role and is ready to use any opportunity to strengthen its position, and today may be only the first step in a long and difficult process of transforming global trade.